Well, the 97th Academy Awards are now behind us, one of the most important and oldest film awards, alongside the Palme d'Or and the Golden Globe. The Oscars are often accused of controversial wins, racism, sexism, ageism, forced political correctness, and more. It's an award that means everything and nothing at the same time. There is a well-defined type of film that wins the top prize every year: a historical drama, a musician's biopic, a melodrama, or a quirky indie comedy. As a result, a mediocre but proper film can take home the trophy. Unfortunately, such films don't always stand the test of time, while those left without an award often become classics for many viewers. The voting process has been criticized multiple times, and jury members have been accused of corruption and favoritism. Yet, despite all of this, filmmakers around the world dream of winning an Oscar, and every recipient takes pride in the achievement. So let's try to understand why the results of the Academy Award are not always straightforward, and whether we even need the Oscar in 2025. The first Academy Awards ceremony took place on May 16, 1929, at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood, aiming to recognize outstanding achievements in the film industry and promote the art and science of filmmaking. It was a modest event, 250 guests, a 15-minute ceremony, and a rather simple statuette. This was the first and only ceremony held behind closed doors. Radio broadcasts were introduced in 1930, and the Oscars made their television debut in 1953. There were no paparazzi, no red carpets. Back then, the event was called the Merit Awards, and the familiar name Oscar only appeared in 1934. In its early years, the award categories were more diverse, including Best Choreography, Best Title Writing, and Best Assistant Director. However, these were eventually phased out.
It's much heavier than I imagined.
The iconic Oscar statuette represents a knight standing on a film reel and holding a double-edged sword. The 5 holes in the reel symbolize the 5 branches of the Academy: producers, screenwriters, directors, actors, and technicians. The design was conceived by Cedric Gibbons, an art director at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who later won 6 Oscars himself for Best Production Design. The first statuette was created in 1928, made of bronze and coated in gold. Later, the Academy switched to an alloy of tin, antimony, and copper, with a thin layer of 24-karat gold. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the award was even made of plaster. Since the first ceremony, over 3,000 golden statuettes have been awarded. However, there have been instances where recipients refused the honor. For example, in 1936, screenwriter Dudley Nichols declined the award due to a dispute with the Academy over writers' credits. In 1971, George C. Scott rejected the Oscar for Best Actor for his role in Patton, calling the ceremony a 2-hour meat parade and refusing to take part in it. He felt that the Academy Awards were demeaning to the extraordinary talents of his peers, using the phrase meat parade to criticize the commercial and competitive aspects of the event, which he saw as degrading to the inherent artistry of cinema. In 1973, Marlon Brando won for The Godfather, but sent activist Sacheen Littlefeather to decline the award on his behalf. She delivered a speech criticizing the film industry's treatment of Native Americans. Despite these refusals, the Academy still considers these individuals official Oscar winners. Before we break down controversial Oscar wins, we need to understand where it all comes from. It would be naive to assume that filmmakers always create movies purely based on the stories they want to tell, with an Oscar, if they are lucky enough to win one, being just the icing on the cake. The Oscar is a big deal. It boosts the reputation of actors, directors, and studios while also increasing ticket sales for their future projects. Since around the early 1980s, instead of treating an Oscar win as a natural byproduct of making a great film, studios and producers have often attempted to craft movies specifically designed to secure nominations. These films tend to be more serious, depressing, or artistic. This practice is commonly referred to as Oscar bait, while the phenomenon itself is sometimes mockingly called Oscar mania. Oscar bait films typically include depressing dramas, inspirational stories, or portrayals of extreme human suffering. Topics such as racism, mental illness, and struggling underprivileged characters often take center stage. Comedies frequently won Oscars in the mid-20th century, but by the late 20th and the early 21st centuries, they had almost disappeared from the Best Picture nominees. One of the biggest cliches of this phenomenon is a comedic actor taking on a dramatic role in an attempt to be taken seriously. Genres like science fiction, horror, and action usually receive recognition only in technical categories, such as visual effects. In the entire history of the Academy Awards, no science fiction film has ever won Best Picture, and only 2 fantasy films have ever taken the top prize.
The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King,
The Shape of Water.
Technically, a non-English language film can win Best Picture. However, throughout the history of the awards, only 14 foreign language films have been nominated in this category, and only 1 has ever won.
Parasite.
This seems odd. After all, great cinema is made in many languages. The logic behind which films make it to the Best Picture shortlist and which are relegated to the International Feature Film category remains unclear. A long time ago, 2001: A Space Odyssey, possibly the best English language film of its year, had to settle for a consolation statuette for visual effects, while Seven and Fight Club received only 1 technical nomination each. These examples alone would be enough to call the award's reputation into question, but let's take a look at other controversial wins. 1942, How Green Was My Valley. Citizen Kane is known as the eternal winner of countless greatest films of all time rankings. Meanwhile, How Green Was My Valley went down in history as the movie that somehow prevented Citizen Kane from winning the Oscar for Best Picture. John Ford's How Green Was My Valley is by no means a bad film. However, nearly everyone considers Orson Welles' cult masterpiece, Citizen Kane, one of the greatest films ever made. Yet in 1942, it failed to win the Best Picture award. Fortunately, Citizen Kane has stood the test of time and remains widely watched, whereas How Green Was My Valley has faded into obscurity, despite being added to the U.S. National Film Registry in 1990. 1958, The Bridge on the River Kwai. The Bridge on the River Kwai is not a bad war movie. It has some very strong moments, but the same year gave us a much brighter masterpiece. The movie 12 Angry Men, even today, can be considered a benchmark example of how the justice system should work, both the bar and the prosecutor's office and the jury. This picture is an example that ordinary dialogues in one location can be incredibly interesting.
and the Oscar goes to Forrest Gump.
1995, Forrest Gump. The 1995 Oscars were a nightmare for everyone who voted for Best Picture. Many expected the award to go to the cult classic Pulp Fiction, or the emotionally powerful adaptation of Stephen King's The Shawshank Redemption. But instead, the prize went to the idyllic historical drama, Forrest Gump. Fans of Pulp Fiction were shocked by Forrest Gump's victory and still haven't backed down from their stance to this day.
And the Oscar goes to Shakespeare in Love.
1999, Shakespeare in Love. One of the most controversial decisions in Oscar history took place at the 71st Academy Awards. Just think about it. Shakespeare in Love won over The Thin Red Line, Life is Beautiful, and even Saving Private Ryan. The Oscars had never seen such a shocking upset. In a moment of collective lapse in judgment, the Academy awarded multiple statuettes to a film that was promptly forgotten, leaving no lasting mark on cinema. Looking back, many attribute this ruthless award season to Harvey Weinstein, who secured Shakespeare in Love's victory through an aggressive PR campaign, smear tactics against Saving Private Ryan, and direct influence over Academy voters. Over time, it has become undeniably clear that Saving Private Ryan was the superior film. It is now regarded as a classic, while Shakespeare in Love, despite being one of the best films of 1998, never achieved the same level of cultural impact. 2003, Chicago. In the early 2000s, Hollywood experienced a wave of nostalgia for musicals. Moulin Rouge sparked the revival in 2001, and a year later, Chicago swept nearly every major award.
Chicago!
Chicago isn't as bad as some critics claim. Most of the backlash comes from the fact that the year was filled with far more deserving films. But that's not the movie's fault. Chicago competed against Gangs of New York, The Hours, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Pianist.
And the Oscar goes to Crash.
2006, Crash. Ang Lee's critically acclaimed romantic drama, Brokeback Mountain, was the frontrunner for Best Picture at the 2006 Oscars. It had already won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, along with major awards at the Golden Globes and BAFTAs. However, as the Oscars approached, reports surfaced about homophobia among older Academy members, leading many experts to doubt whether Brokeback Mountain would secure the win. In a shocking upset, Crash took home the award, making it one of the most controversial Best Picture wins in history. To this day, critics still consider Crash one of the weakest winners in the category. 2009, Slumdog Millionaire. The Dark Knight was undeniably the best film of the year. Even without Heath Ledger's unforgettable performance, the movie redefined the superhero genre by grounding it in reality. The real disappointment was that it wasn't even nominated for Best Picture. At the Oscars, Slumdog Millionaire's biggest competitor was The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which had the most nominations. While Slumdog Millionaire is a great film, its supposedly gritty realism often feels exaggerated, largely due to the performances of certain characters. Director Danny Boyle brought global attention to life in India, but did so through over-the-top portrayals and stereotypical characters. 2010, The Hurt Locker. The victory of The Hurt Locker at the 2010 Oscars for Best Picture remains controversial for two key reasons: its political undertones and its unexpected win over the frontrunner, Avatar. James Cameron's Avatar was not only a technical revolution, but also the highest-grossing film of all time at that point. Many expected such groundbreaking cinematic achievement to secure the Oscar. Yet, The Hurt Locker, a much smaller war drama that earned only around $49 million compared to Avatar's $2.7 billion, walked away with the award. While The Hurt Locker is a solid war film, its win continues to spark debate, especially when placed against Avatar's technological innovation and massive financial success. 2011, The King's Speech.
The King's Speech.
Today, The King's Speech is mostly remembered for being forgotten. This historical drama about King George VI overcoming his speech impediment during World War II wasn't a terrible film, but it paled in comparison to its bolder competitors. Adding to the controversy was the fact that The King's Speech seemed carefully engineered to win an Oscar. While it had its moments of genuine engagement, it simply couldn't compete with the grand scale of Inception or the emotional depth of The Social Network. These two films should have been the real contenders for Best Picture, but the Academy had other plans.
Argo! Congratulations!
2013, Argo. Argo was the film that solidified Ben Affleck's reputation not just as an actor, but as a director. This historical drama depicts a real-life CIA mission to rescue American diplomats from Iran. I've watched it twice, and while it's a solid film, it doesn't quite feel like an Oscar-worthy Best Picture winner. The competition that year was fierce, with Lincoln, Life of Pi, Zero Dark 30, and Silver Linings Playbook all in the running, each of which arguably had stronger cases for the award. This only raises more questions about Argo's victory.
Moonlight, Best Picture.
2017, Moonlight. Moonlight made history as the first LGBTQ-themed film to win Best Picture, something that didn't happen with the previously mentioned Brokeback Mountain. But beyond that, its impact is debatable. La La Land was widely considered the frontrunner, earning 14 nominations and winning 6 awards, including Best Actress and Best Director. Over time, it has become clear that La La Land captured the hearts of most audiences, making Moonlight's victory one of the more surprising moments in Oscar history. 2018, The Shape of Water. 2017 was an exceptional year for cinema. Among the groundbreaking Get Out, Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, the powerful Darkest Hour starring Gary Oldman, Lady Bird, and Call Me By Your Name, Guillermo del Toro's fairy tale fantasy The Shape of Water didn't seem like the obvious frontrunner. Instead, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri stood out as one of the strongest crime dramas of the decade and felt like the more deserving winner. However, the Academy chose Del Toro's whimsical love story, making for another unexpected Oscar decision. Throughout its long history, the Academy has repeatedly overlooked some of the greatest filmmakers. Even those who revolutionized the industry often went unrecognized or received their awards far too late. It's hard to believe, but legendary directors like Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, Ridley Scott, Sidney Lumet, David Fincher, and Tim Burton were all ignored by the Oscars. Alfred Hitchcock's iconic films Psycho, Rear Window, and Vertigo are still considered the gold standard of the thriller genre. Yet, despite 5 nominations for Best Director, he never won an Oscar for his work. The Academy only honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1968, a belated recognition for a man who redefined suspense cinema.
Thank you.
Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey and The Shining became cultural landmarks. However, throughout his career, he won only a single Oscar for Best Visual Effects. The Academy never awarded him for his direction. You can direct Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator, and The Martian, but to the Academy, that's still not enough. Ridley Scott has been nominated for Best Director 3 times, but has never won. Sidney Lumet was a master of realism and dialogue, but the Academy favored more grand-scale productions. Despite directing classics like 12 Angry Men, Network, and Dog Day Afternoon, he was nominated 5 times for Best Director, but never won. David Fincher's films are often cold, dark, and unsettling, qualities that don't fit the usual Oscar mold. While Fight Club, Seven, and Zodiac remain cinematic landmarks, he was nominated for Best Director 3 times for The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Social Network, and Mank, but each time he walked away empty-handed. The Academy rarely recognizes directors who specialize in fantasy and gothic aesthetics. Tim Burton, who gave the world Edward Scissorhands, Batman, and The Nightmare Before Christmas, has never even been nominated for Best Director. Controversial wins, corruption, racism, sexism, ageism, and forced political correctness. The Oscars have been criticized for all of these issues over the past decades. Unlike most film awards, the Oscars are decided by a general vote from Academy members rather than a jury selection. This system has been heavily criticized, as Academy members have often been accused of corruption. There have also been concerns about the demographics of the voting body, which has historically consisted mostly of white men. Critics argue that this has led to discrimination against filmmakers of color and women in the industry. In 2015, not a single black actor was nominated for an Oscar. The same had happened in 2011 and previously in 1998. This led activist April Reign to create the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. However, the movement truly gained momentum in 2016 when the Oscars once again displayed a severe lack of diversity. That year, hashtag #OscarsSoWhite went viral, drawing global attention to the Academy's long history of racial exclusion. People pointed out that 92% of Academy members were white, highlighting the institution's systemic bias. Although some progress has been made over the years, the internet never forgets. The biggest issue is that the Oscars are no longer a celebration of outstanding films, but rather a platform for awarding the right kind of movies. The Oscars represent prestige, but they are not always fair. Politics, marketing, and the Academy's subjective decisions often leave the most deserving films without recognition. But perhaps that's the point. The Oscars are a reflection of their time, its trends and interests, rather than an absolute measure of cinematic excellence. Films that were unjustly snubbed often become far more influential than the actual winners. They live on in the hearts of audiences, are endlessly quoted, rewatched, and analyzed. Ironically, history does a far better job of recognizing greatness than a golden statuette ever could. Once upon a time, Citizen Kane lost, yet it became a symbol of cinematic brilliance. Taxi Driver was overlooked, yet its impact still resonates today. In the end, the Oscars are neither a definitive judgment nor the ultimate mark of success. They are just a moment in history, open to debate, but impossible to ignore. Perhaps the true value of the Oscars lies not in the awards themselves, but in the discussions they provoke. Should we consider the Oscars a benchmark in the film industry if it is not always fair? Or has cinema long outgrown award ceremonies, with recognition coming through other means?